Okay, welcome everyone to the Hilltop Outreach Institute Learning Stories series. We are so excited to be here in community with you. Even if it's via the Zoom room, it's still wonderful to be able to connect. And we know how busy you all are as working professionals with very full lives. And you have so many options when it comes to your trainings and your PD that we are very honored that you choose the Outreach Institute for your training needs. My name is Becky Krueger. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the outreach coordinator here at Hilltop. And I'm here with my colleague, Emily. Emily, would you like to say hello?
Hi, welcome everyone.
Emily and I will be leading tonight's training, but we are two of a wonderful large team who will be facilitating this whole series. So while you'll be with Emily and myself this evening, our next three sessions will be led by members of our amazing mentor team at Hilltop. And tonight is really the foundation of this series. We're calling it the what and why of story, because we really want this to be a very interactive and participatory session, as will the next three sessions. But really, we're going to be asking for a lot of audience participation tonight, giving you lots of opportunities to share your thoughts about story, what it means to you, and why it's meaningful. So we just ask that you participate to the best of your ability, whether that is coming off mute and speaking to the whole group, whether it is using the chat to participate, as well as participating in breakout sessions. And we'll have, I think, two or three of those tonight. And we do understand some of you might be in transit, taking care of family members. You might still be at work. So we understand that you might have some challenges to participating, and that's perfectly okay. Just do the best that you can. Lastly, before we jump into our content, a few housekeeping items this evening. We'd like to give a warm welcome to Dory and Kelly, who are here as our ASL interpreters this evening. Also, if you would like access to closed captioning, you can find that option at the bottom of your screen where it says show captions. And we also have captions currently running in this live session, and they will be visible in the recording as well. And lastly, if you would like STARS credit for attending tonight or a certificate of participation, there is a link in the chat for you to do that. I'm going to go ahead and put that in one more time. And if at any time tonight you have any questions or any tech difficulties, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly in the chat. And Emily, I think that's all I needed to say. Oh, just so you know, we'll take a 5-minute break right around 7 p.m. tonight as well. And yeah, I think I'll pass it off to you, Emily.
Thanks, Becky. It is a tradition for us to acknowledge the land that we're on, even when we're in a Zoom room, and there may be folks from lots of different places, but here in Washington, we occupy the lands of the Coast Salish people. Where I work in Seattle, we occupy the traditional land of the Duwamish people in this city that's named for their chief, as well as the Suquamish, the Muckleshoot, and the Snoqualmie tribes in what is known today as King County, and also the lands that touch the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Puyallup and Tulalip Nation. Acknowledging the land is a simple way of resisting the erasure of indigenous histories and also a way to continue to honor the truth. Alongside a land acknowledgement, it's also important to couple this with action. So we encourage you to continue learning more about your local tribes and consider how you can support restorative justice and land sovereignty with the resources you have, at least at the local level, if not also the federal level. There's a few links on the screen if you want to do a screen grab or take a photo of that. Maybe Becky, you can send them when you send follow-up notes as well. That has a bunch of information and just resources to support local tribes. Another thing I've been sharing with folks is that I recently had an opportunity to attend ecological tour at the Duwamish Longhouse in Seattle. And it was really, really amazing. Even though it was like pouring down rain and we're like soaking wet for this whole 2 or 3 hours that we were on this tour, I learned so much about the history of the land and how the land was used and has changed over time and why. And it was just really interesting. So I highly recommend attending these types of events if you have the opportunity at any point in time.
Great. Thank you, Emily. So we want to really ground this training in talking about who is here in the room and really connecting that to what story means to us. So Emily and I are going to tell you a little bit about ourselves, and you'll have a chance to do so as well. So again, my name is Becky, pronouns she, her. I grew up in rural Wisconsin in a family of six, and I was the youngest of the four kids and the only girl in the family. And I like to say that my brothers both loved me fiercely and almost killed me with tongue in cheek. We had some very adventurous, memorable times together. Sometimes it was a lot of fun, sometimes it was scary. I was also really lucky to have a lot of time with cousins and a lot of time with my grandparents, particularly my paternal grandma, who was really kind of a Mae West character, is how I describe her. She had a really interesting and, for a woman of her time, a really unusual background and experiences. She drove a semi truck with my grandpa for several years. She owned a bar. She traveled all over the Western United States. And I was just fascinated by the little tidbits of story that she would share with me as a child. And I wish I could have learned more. And of course, I wish I would have written them down. But seeing her really be this strong, independent, unique woman was very inspiring for me. And also, I got to see that in my mom, who was a very, very different kind of person, but also had that strong and unique energy to her that was inspiring. And she was a very loving and caring person. And I feel lucky that I've really inherited that side of myself from her. Uh, I loved books as a child. Reading Rainbow, I was a Reading Rainbow kid, Sesame Street kid. I loved, as soon as I got off the bus after school, I loved running into my house and going to my bedroom and hiding under the covers with audio tapes and, my little golden books. And as I got a little older, I loved writing my own stories and reading stories to my classmates, and particularly scary stories had a real impact on me. And I loved seeing the power that they had on other people. And so that's just something I always remember, that scary stories had a real, they just were delightful for me as a kid. I loved being scared and I loved scaring others. And it wasn't just the fictional scary stories, it was the real scary stories that the grown-ups in my life would share with me that really stuck. So that's a little bit, a lot about me. I'm going to pass it off to Emily. Emily, what's your story?
Well, I grew up in a lot of places around the country, but I primarily call both Michigan and Seattle my home. I'd say I've spent probably about an equal amount of time in each places. As the oldest kid in a single parent household, I spent a lot of time taking care of my brothers and my sisters. So at a very young age, I was navigating how to be responsible, but also trying to find ways to maintain my own experiences and my own identity. Um, I do think a lot of that shaped who I am and how I've ended up in the childcare field. I think I've basically been taking care of kids for about 90% of my life. And while I obviously enjoy that, I'm now also in a professional role in which I also support the adults who are taking care of children. And I really enjoy that as well. But it does come with a whole new set of challenges that I continue to learn about as time goes on. But to connect my experiences to the idea of story, I think most of the stories I heard in childhood were a little more on the tragic side of things. Like I remember like a lot of like stories about, my family living through the Depression and the things my grandma had to do in order to take care of her really large family. And so I heard a lot of tragedy in story as a child, and it's only been recently that um, that I'm recognizing like that's one way to sort of pass on our histories, but I also have really grown to appreciate story as a means to share growth and the development of identity. So that's it for me. But now we want to open the floor for you all to say hello and who you are and something about your identity that you'd like to share with the group. You can raise your hand or just unmute yourself and start talking. You don't have to have a big, delicious story about stories if you don't want to. I think we'll be talking more about that in a minute.
Hello. Um, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, Luis.
Hi. Um, I don't know who's in here that knows who I am, but my name's Luis. I work at Hilltop Children's Center. It's my third year working there, and I work as a support educator. Um, I'd say something that shaped my identity and story has been my family upbringing. My family being my mom, my dad, and my brother, being the only people that I have in my family here in the States has really impacted me throughout my whole life. I've been family oriented since day one. I do everything for my family. I think about my family. I care for my family. And eventually, I tell everyone I started my Hilltop job because I want to have an amazing family when I grow up. So everything has just been related to my family and how family oriented I've been. And I want to continue that tradition for myself because I know how deeply that's helped me get through tough times. So I just really want to be that person for the other people in my life that I consider my family,
Thank you so much for sharing, Luis.
of course.
Hello.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Hi.
Uh, my name is Pamela. I work at the Hearing, Speech, and Deaf Center in Seattle. I, hang on, I'm looking, I got the monitor up there and the camera down here. So sorry about that. Um, and the idea of story has been very important to me in my life and in my career. And I feel like the stories that we tell shape the way we understand the world around us. And um, I think that's incredibly powerful. So that's what I'm going to say today.
Thank you so much, Pamela.
Becky, I do feel like this is our next breakout session is talking a little bit more about what story means to you. So I'm wondering if, because everyone's seeming a little hesitant, if we want to start moving into the breakout groups right now.
Sounds great.
Okay.
So Emily's turning the slide here for us. We would love to give you an opportunity to go into a breakout session with maybe just one, maybe two other persons and talk about what does story mean to you? What comes up for you when you hear this word story? And I will go ahead and create breakout rooms. I just want to check in with folks here who identify as deaf or hard of hearing. If you have a preference to be, I believe that there are maybe 4 folks who identify as deaf or hard of hearing. If you prefer to be all in one breakout session together, or if you would like to be in 2 smaller sessions, is there a preference? Okay, thank you, Kat. All right, I'm going to go ahead and just start putting together those rooms.
And this is just going to be like a 6 or 7 minute that should give everyone plenty of time to just share a little bit about what story means to you. And we recognize we haven't given you a lot of time to think about that. And then some folks may need that. So just feel free to share what you can, what you know right now, what story means to you.
So Becky, you have 3 deaf people
Mhm.
and 4 signing people,
Okay,
including me, and you have 2 interpreters. So think
okay,
about that when you make your groups.
okay, great. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and do this. Thanks for your patience, everybody. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and assign Dory. Can I assign you to room 2 as our interpreter in room 2? Okay. And I went ahead and opened room 2 for folks who identify as deaf or hard of hearing, and we have our interpreter Dory in there. If I have missed putting you in that room, please just let me know. I'm going to go ahead and assign everyone else now. Okay. There should be a room for everyone. So thank you for taking that time to share your thoughts around what story means to you. We'd love to hear from the audience what came up in your conversations. And you can either speak here in the room or you can use the chat.
Becky, just so you know, I can't see the chat. So if something pops up there, will you just let me know?
Definitely. Yeah.
We got quiet bunch tonight.
No,
I
not
think
me.
we all agreed that stories were just so crucial to lifting children out of anonymity and just um, hearing their perspectives. And I think Lewis said it was about capturing this journey of where the children are, they have been, and where they're going. And Rose was really thoughtful about families in her 1-year-old classroom and what that looks like for them and creating those stories for the children around the lunch table. And I just think it's really fascinating and important kind of artifact for the children as they leave our programs and they have all of these stories of themselves that they can reflect back on when they're a little bit older.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Pamela. I love that crucial to lifting children out of anonymity, really honoring each child's uniqueness and personal identity. No two children are the same. No two people are the same. Thank you, Kat and Lynn, for sharing in the chat. Kat says, to me, a story is about sharing an experience, whether mine or someone else's. It builds community and connection. Inviting others into my world while also giving me a window into theirs. Stories span time, carrying meaning from the past, shaping the present, and influencing the future. And Lynn says, for me, story is bringing awareness and history to things I have very little knowledge about. And I think we have time for one more share back. These are lovely.
I think it's okay. I'm just gonna move us on, Becky. I think that's a really amazing list we have right there so far, for
And
sure.
we had one last contribution in the chat. This
Okay, perfect.
Sam. Thank you, Sam. Story is rooted in language and how we view the world. Yeah. So seeing lots of themes, right? Connections, relationships, making meaning, connecting past to present to future, language, journey, and awareness. Yeah, these are great. Thank you.
This showing the next screen?
Mhm.
Awesome. So we've talked a lot about story so far and what stories mean to us and what they mean to other folks. I am wondering what, if we could have a group discussion, if possible, about what do you know or what have you heard about learning stories in particular? Why have you decided to come to this training? I want to get sort of a shared understanding of what learning stories are to you, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Well, I came because I really wanted to just hear other perspectives about learning stories. And I think sometimes it's really challenging for people to get into the child's perspective and kind of understand the child's strength and the challenges. Sometimes it's really difficult for people to write this story of the child because they have to know the child really well and have to capture the moment when the learning is happening. So I'm just trying to figure out better ways to help understand that so I can help our team understand that a little bit better.
Thank you, Sandra. And Pamela contributed in the chat. She says, we use learning stories in our center and was hoping that we could find some inspiration for growing this practice. Right.
Um, I've never published a learning story. Like I've kind of drafted two or three that I kind of want to like get feedback on, especially when we did the activity with Hilltop with Miss Wendy's. I forgot her last name, but
Wendy Lee.
Wendy Lee. Yes, we did it. We did a cool training with her, and I don't know, it really inspired me to challenge myself to write a story. And that day I did. And like I went up to her and she kind of like looked it over and gave me a couple pointers. So like my goal this year is to at least write one that I'm just like really proud of and that can, I don't know, maybe lead to a couple more that I can eventually make. But right now I'm just focusing on one and just getting better at being able to write a learning story in the first place.
Mhm. Awesome. Thanks, Luis. And we have some comments in the chat. Thank you, Sam. Sam says, it's how we present the child's competencies, growth, and potential direction of growth to parents as collaborators. Learning stories can be living documents that grow over time. And Kat says, writing stories is something that naturally comes for me, but in the context of school and tracking the children's progress, it's an obstacle for some reason. We hear you there, Kat. How do you do it? How do you find the time in your busy day to write stories about children? And Lynn says, I decided to join this session because we used learning stories in our program, and I would love to deepen my understanding and improve my ability to observe and write meaningful stories about children. Thanks, Lynn.
I can share about learning stories. My name's Rose. I am a teacher at Hilltop. I work with 1-year-olds. I've worked on a lot of learning stories. Like the drafts are never ending because you get inspiration, but it's like you're saying with the time, it can feel very hard to manage that. Um, I took a long time to get my first one out, and it took feedback from teachers and my mentor teacher who gave me like the confidence to keep making more. So I'm just looking to start back up, especially because we have conferences coming up at Hilltop and having meaningful learning stories to show families. I had that conversation in my breakout room about how we're able to provide experiences that our children are having and to be able to share that with them. So I would love to just be able to work on a learning story and be able to kind of force myself a little bit to work it out and have this time to work through it. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, Rose, and for being honest about the challenges and how it's not always a smooth process, and we can put a lot of pressure on ourselves to produce this perfect, beautiful product. And we all feel that. And my and Emily's hope is that by the end of tonight, you have a little more grace for yourself and realize that perfection is not the goal with these learning stories, that what you choose to write about a child is in a way inherently perfect because you are showing up to really tend to that child and honor who they are and share that with the people who care about them. And one more comment in the chat. Thanks, Naomi. Naomi says, I came to learn and discover opportunities where I can find myself writing a learning story about the kids I see every day. Awesome goal, Naomi. I think now we can move to the next slide, Emily. Thank you, everybody, for participating.
Becky, you might have to walk me through what I do next. I'm not very tech savvy, everyone.
Yeah, no problem.
I want to go to...
Well, actually, Emily, if you advance to the next slide.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That's
Next.
the right one.
Yeah, I think we can just stay in this mode.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very visible. Is there any way you can make the box bigger? That
Yeah.
slide. Great.
Like that?
Yeah, that looks good. Can everyone see the slide okay? Can do a thumbs up or just say yes. Great. Thank you. Okay. So we intentionally started this training with just a lot of open space for you to do some of your own reflecting and to share your own experience with story and to talk together about what you already know about story, what it means to you, before sharing some information that we have learned about learning stories and resources that are out there in the world so that you can start to do some of that, what is the word, integration with your own knowledge and maybe some new content. So we'd like to start here with sharing that content with you. This concept of learning stories, where does it come from? So what we have really learned at Hilltop is the origin of learning stories from the schools and early learning programs of Aotearoa, New Zealand. And we have looked to those programs for several years now for inspiration and guidance around what is a learning story? How do you create these pieces of documentation? And why do they matter? Why are they so powerful? So Wendy Lee, who Luis mentioned earlier and is here on the screen, is a professional development facilitator in Aotearoa, New Zealand, who's been in the early learning field for many, many years. And she has really been spreading the gospel, so to speak, for decades now about the power of learning stories. We had the great fortune of having her in Seattle a few times now, and she was just here last fall as part of our early learning conference. And Wendy Lee uses this quote that I'd love for a volunteer to read for us. Would anyone like to read this slide out loud?
I'll do it since I brought her up.
Thanks, Luis.
Says, learning stories are an assessment approach in early childhood education, which reflect the complexity of children's learning and development and how it is positioned in the context of their interactions with people, places, and things.
Awesome. Thank you, Luis. So really, what is this definition saying if we break it down? Learning stories are a form of assessment. It's one way of looking at children's development. It's a way of really honoring children as complex thinkers and beings who are coming to us as the educators with strengths, gifts, and their own cultural funds of knowledge. And also, learning stories really acknowledge the importance of relationships and the social world that children live in. There's a wonderful free video series on learning stories that Wendy has created. She's also interviewed for many of these videos through her educational leadership project. And we will share a link to that site at the end of this training and also afterwards. So you can really spend some time really just listening to Wendy talk so eloquently about the power of learning stories. You can go to the next slide, Emily. Thank you. So we talked about how this model comes from the schools of Aotearoa, New Zealand, and it is specifically part of a national curriculum in Aotearoa, New Zealand, known as Te Whāriki. And Te Whāriki is a bilingual, bicultural early learning curriculum that is used throughout their country. And it was actually co-created by tribal leaders of the Maori indigenous tribe of Aotearoa, New Zealand. This curriculum was also written by families, by early learning professionals, and by members of the government, of the Ministry of Education. So on this slide, we wanted to introduce you, if you're not already familiar with these two leaders, to Brenda Sutar and Lynette Tamarapa. So Brenda is a principal, as we would say in America, or a kaitiaki, the leader of a Maori school in New Zealand that serves children infant through high school. And Lynette is a member of the Ministry of Education and a senior policy analyst. And we have this quote that, to be honest, I don't know if it's credited to Lynette or Brenda. It's often associated with them both, but we'd love to have a volunteer read this quote for us as well.
It's a little hard to read, but I'm going to try. It's really
Thanks,
light
Lynn.
in the lighter green. It says analyzing learning and making that learning visible for is it Mokopuna,
Yes.
your descendants, their was it Wanahu, their family, and for Wanu, and for the educator themselves. Can provide the motivation to explore further, to go deeper, and to carry out research.
Mhm.
It's a process that sustains everyone, and in doing so, the fire keeps burning. Learning stories can provide the inspiration for educators to keep the fires burning as they establish and maintain relationships with people, places, activities, and the earth and ground.
Awesome. Thank you, Darlene. And I realized after I asked for a volunteer that there are some Maori words in there. So thank you for being brave and offering to read those for us. So really, what is at the heart of the Te Whāriki curriculum and the learning stories approach are these indigenous ways of being, these Maori concepts of really honoring what has come before us and this concept of looking to the past in order to move forward and to guide how we live our lives. It's also about this concept of story as a form of honoring children, their strengths, their capabilities, and their identities as part of a larger family and a lineage. And this quote that Lynette and Brenda use of keeping the fires burning, this is a Maori concept about how are we really caring for the generations that we are raising, the generations that are growing up after us. How are we teaching them how to care for and steward the land and to maintain community, language, and culture? So it's this curriculum and these Maori values that the learning stories model comes from. So here's a little quick definition, a kind of a summary of all of that. A learning story is a tool to assess child's development, to reflect on who they are, and also for us as practitioners to really be researchers in our work with children and families and colleagues. Learning stories are a way to really highlight why play-based learning is valuable. They can be an art form. It's an opportunity for us to be creative in our writing and in representing how we decide to tell stories about children. So much room for creative expression. They're considered a love letter. Often, learning stories are written directly to a child, and it's this way of the adult saying, I see you, I hear you, I want to know you, and encourage you. And they're also considered a mirror for children. It's an opportunity for kids to learn how others see who they are and for them to come to know themselves better, which is also a really strong connection to the first goal of anti-bias education, that goal of identity. Who am I in a social world? Yes, okay. So what can a learning story include? And again, these are just some guidelines. There is no one right or wrong way to write a learning story, but these are some components that can be very helpful for making that learning visible. So we often want to include photographs of the child. What are they doing in a moment? Can be really powerful if we can include a sequence of photos. It's very common to see stories that show a child working through a problem or solving a challenge step by step. It's very helpful to write learning stories that have descriptive observations. So we, as the educator, can really paint the picture for the reader of what was happening that day or in that moment that drew us to this situation with this child. It's very powerful when a learning story talks about the learning that is happening. Not only does it, again, show the value of play and children's ability to be co-constructors of their own knowledge, but it also really highlights your skills and your professionalism as an educator. When you are bringing your own voice to a learning story, it's a way of showing your expertise and that you have a lot to contribute as an educator. You're bringing all this knowledge and you have insightful things to say about what you're seeing in this child. And also a powerful learning story includes an invitation to the adults who take care of this child, to the family. What do the caretakers see happening in this story? We want to really learn, how does the family see their own child? What do they know about their child in their community? And then lastly, a powerful learning story includes the next steps. So this is where our curriculum development piece comes in, where our planning comes in based on our observations of children. And also, this is where we have an opportunity to be a researcher in our early learning programs. It might be a time to offer something new to the child and pose a challenge to them. Or it might be time or an opportunity to let them continue practicing this one particular exploration or with this one particular material. So The time is 6:54, and we would love to send you all to one more breakout session. It'll be another short one, just about 5 to 6 minutes. And we'll take a break right after this breakout session. So the questions we would love for you to discuss with the people in your group. After hearing all that content and reflecting on what you all shared earlier in our session tonight, what do you really hope children would get out of a learning story? What would you hope the impact would be on a child? So that's one question. And after you discuss that, we'd like for you to consider, what do you really want the impact on families to be? What would you hope they would gain from a learning story about their child? Okay, welcome back, everyone. We're going to continue where we left off. Emily and I would love to hear what came up in your conversations about these two questions. What would you hope children get out of learning stories? And what would you hope that families get out of learning stories?
I think that we hope that children feel seen, and it has a huge impact on visually being able to see themselves with the photographs and broadcasting how capable they are in relation to others and how competent they can feel in the early education setting to try new things, to be challenged, to try to solve problems. So kind of just like you were saying earlier, Becky, they're seen, they are heard, and we are encouraging them.
Thank you, Sandra. I also see folks are adding in the chat. Naomi shared, we hope that both children and families read it if they are able to, and that they are able to see the child's brilliance. And Kat shared, for children, I have both a short-term and a long-term hope. The short term, I hope the child gets to sit with their parents and read together, fostering bonding and encouraging conversation, especially since children often don't share much about their day. We know what that's like. And the long-term hope is that these stories become a love letter to the child's future self, a time capsule of their childhood. I love that, Kat. It's a gift they can return to, a way to know themselves more deeply as they grow. Yeah, beautiful. And then Kat also shared a hope for families. Kat says, our school serves families navigating cultural gaps between deaf and hearing worlds. I hope that through stories, we can bridge that gap, giving families the opportunity to truly know each other. For parents who may be grieving their child's difference, I hope stories provide a sense of comfort and assurance that their child is not someone to be mourned, but someone to be celebrated. Wholly normal and full of possibility, just like any other child. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Kat. Who else would like to share? I think we have time and space for at least one more.
I don't know if this goes hand in hand with the first bullet point under children, but I mentioned just like that self-recognition. Um, Especially like for my kids, like I feel like they can see a picture and if there's enough context clues, they can maybe even remember like what happened or what they were doing. They can tell what's going on in the picture. So using those images and helping them work through that kind of learning story could even, start helping them learn how to reflect and kind of like think about themselves. What happened? How did I grow? Even though, of course, maybe they don't understand that kind of train of thought, just so maybe introducing that idea of reflection, like, oh, this is what happened. What were you feeling? What did you think? And moving forward from there.
Yeah, how cool, Luis. A way to introduce children to the practice of reflection. That's awesome. You're on mute, Emily.
Thank you everyone for sharing. I think that that was a really great and powerful list of things that we hope for children and we hope for their families and we hope is also a tool for education, right? And helping parents who are struggling with who their children might be, and helping them see who their child can be or who they are in a social context, in a social environment, in a way that they might not necessarily be able to see yet. But we can see it because we're participating in that social environment with them. I think we want to move now. We've talked about what we hope for children in learning stories, what we hope for families in learning stories. But another really, really important piece is really thinking about what you, as an educator who knows these children well, what you want to get out of the process of writing a learning story. And one way that I think about this is it's almost like having a goal. Like I've already heard a few of you mention, like, I'm not feeling confident, or I'm not sure about the process, or I got all these drafts and so I'm stuck in the logistics. But really thinking about what your goal is in writing a learning story. And often that goal is attached to the child or the family themselves, right? But if you have a goal in mind, it's much more possible to attain that goal, regardless of challenges that are popping up, right? Like instead of focusing on like the logistics of following a script to write a learning story, how do I write a learning story? But if you have this intention around what you want for this child or what you want for this family, I think it can just be a lot more productive for you and for your audience, right? Whoever your audience might be. And Becky and I were talking about this before. We talked about it's sort of valuing the process over the product, right? So, you know, I think focusing on that and letting some of that intimidation go, that can be a part, especially for people who are first learning how to write learning stories. These goals can sort of help center you in the intention of the learning story rather than the logistics of the learning story. So I'd really love to hear people either write in the chat or share out loud what you as an educator want to get out of the process of writing.
Sam shared a hope and a goal in the chat. He says, I hope that it becomes a reflective process in which new insights may be found. Thanks, Sam.
And if it's helpful, think about the children and families you're working with right now.
Mhm.
Um, when I hear this question, I think of like proof of the progress, like for the child, and it's especially helpful with the families that, at least in my age group, that more so coddle their 2-year-old. And I'm like, no, like your 2-year-old can do so many things if you just give them that freedom, you know? Like I'm want to really push our Rainier pod of 2-year-olds. So just having like this artifact of this moment in time to show them like, hey, like your child got over this hump of adversity, or your child solved this problem on their own, your child, whatever it is, right, did this, and they can maybe even incorporate that in their day-to-day life at home or outside of Hilltop in this circumstance or whatever. And I think internally for me, I'm very hard on myself. So I think even for me, it might be a fragment in time where I can look back and be like, wow, like this child had some growth and I had some sort of impact on this child's life. Like I had a role in this development, in this accomplishment, in this feat that just, again, shows a little bit of my work, even though it was mainly the child. I was maybe just there to be that little guiding hand in that moment, or just an observer.
Mhm.
And the fact that I was able to be in that moment in the first place is just wonderful for me, right? Especially growing this attachment that I have to these kids that I work with today. Like it just means the world to me.
Thank you, Luis. We have a couple more contributions in the chat. Pamela says, I love taking the time to be in the creative process and just making the space to write. So really just enjoying that writing process. And Lynn says, I hope to show what the children know and understand, and how we can feed them more resources to increase their mind as they grow. Yeah. So not only celebrating the child's strengths and what they are bringing to that learning space, but also to inform what's next. How do we keep building on this child's strengths? How do we support that continued growth? And Kat says, as a new teacher, I want to become more natural at recognizing milestones and understanding developmental stages. Writing learning stories will help me be more intentional in how I observe and how I understand each child's growth. It will also deepen my knowledge of the children I work with and allow me to support them more effectively. Most importantly, I want to use these stories to help parents celebrate their child, not just in big achievements, but in the small everyday moments that shape who their child is becoming. Yeah. Yeah, what a great reminder that there are amazing moments happening every day with children. And in many cases, the children in our care are spending most of their day with us. And so there's this real privilege and responsibility to share those stories with the family when we're the ones who are witnessing them. We get this opportunity to share that with the families. And Rose says, I want to be able to find patterns in behavior, to highlight and reframe, especially in terms of creativity in the learning stories that I write. Yeah.
I do want to just plug what the second series, the second episode of the series, is going to be focusing a lot on the observation piece, and some specific tools and strategies. I think we're going to touch on it a little bit tonight too. Um, but yeah, I think our next workshop is going to be really focusing a lot on different strategies to use for observing children more deeply. I heard that come up a little bit in this conversation.
Mhm.
I'm gonna share a quote from Tom Drummond. He is, not sure if you all have heard of him before, but he's a retired preschool educator, and North Seattle College instructor who is very well versed and skilled at writing learning stories. Um, I think the most powerful part to me is, he says you learn who you are through the people who you love telling you what they love about you. And I feel like that is just like the sweetest way to think about a learning story between an educator and a child. It's just, it's really powerful. And we don't necessarily think of educators and children having that sort of relationship, but in early childhood, we often really, really do. And just naming that seems really important. I think Becky might share the link either in the chat and or as a resource to look at in her follow-up email. But he's got a really great website that has a lot of inspiration and that sort of thing that is just a valuable tool for many folks. Um, we've talked a lot about a lot of things. And we're going to keep talking a little bit, and pretty soon we're going to read some actual examples of learning stories. But we're going to cover just a couple more, just different ideas and ways of thinking about learning stories. I think we've talked a lot about these already. That the kids will see their thinking and their ideas are valued. They are citizens of this world, right? um, Educators will learn more about the children. You'll learn more about child development itself and how children are learning just from observing and writing. That process of writing is a lot of like good self-reflection time. They often become part of a child's portfolio. We use portfolios. Some centers do, some centers don't. It really is a really great tool for planning curriculum. When you can get to that point, it might not be where you're at in the beginning, but as learning stories become more of a habit for you and you start feeling more confident, you're going to start being able to connect it to the curriculum that's happening and moving in the classroom. It gives a lot of opportunity to talk with other educators about what might be happening for this child. Why are they doing this? What's motivating them to be in this situation, or what is their intention in this work that they're doing, or look at how much they've grown, or I remember this story that happened recently that was different than this, or all of that kind of stuff, that reflective practice piece that is so important to our work as educators. Again, we talked about it really highlighting the strengths and competencies of children and shows the value of our work as early childhood educators, which, in this particular society isn't often as valued as we see it. It opens doors for conversations with kids and families and parents and really, really, really highlights the value of learning through play. We are in a play-based environment where I work, and there's a lot of different curriculum strategies out there, but learning through play can be highlighted as well as any other curriculum philosophies through writing, through story.
And Emily, can you actually skip to the next slide? Just noticing the time. I want to make sure we have enough time for stories and Q&A.
Yeah, I just want to say real quick that this is just one of our mentor teachers, really, this is her brain on paper, just around like her vision of learning stories, which is really sweet.
Mm-hmm. And we'll make sure you get that slide when we share resources after the training. Just a quick overview as we talk about the challenges of finding the time, managing overwhelm. Where do I even begin? How do I do this? Here are some potential moments to write about if you haven't already considered these. What's capturing your attention in the space with children? Is there a really lovely moment happening between two children, like that picture on the right in our infant room not long ago, where one of the older children was really trying to make connections with the younger children, and the teachers kept noticing this and capturing examples of this happening? Or is it a moment of play that is really like pushing your buttons, whether it's loud play or risky play or play that you just don't really see a lot of value in? Maybe it's just kind of driving you a little bit bonkers. That's a moment to pay attention to as well, because the kids are trying to figure something out or explore. And it could be interesting to wonder, why is that pushing my buttons? Prolonged play, when you notice that a child or a group of children are really immersed in something, really focused. They're in the dramatic play area. They've been in there a long time and they've got all these different materials out and they're talking to each other a lot. Maybe there's some conflict happening too. There's something really deep happening over in that corner. I'm going to go pay closer attention. Sometimes it's just brief moments, simple exchanges. I've seen really lovely learning stories about a child helping another child zip their coat or get their shoe on their foot. And it was just this, 2-minute moment, but the teachers noticed it and knew that it was meaningful about the children who were involved in that exchange and talked about why. Moments of struggle or failure. Is this an opportunity to really highlight a child who is trying to work through a challenge, is building their resilience and their problem-solving skills? And of course, anything that you're delighted to talk about your kids. I was sharing with Emily earlier, I love this little collage of photos because the one on the right and on the bottom, for me, when I see them and I remember a couple of those moments, it evokes this kind of sweet delight, like, oh, that there's something just precious. That's the word that's coming up for me. And then that photo on the top evokes a very different delight for me, where my energy is more like, yeah, you're so strong. And I get excited about seeing a kid learning how to be strong in their body. So delight can take on many different meanings and feel lots of different ways when we're really observing children closely. And I think maybe, can we skip over this one too, Emily? This is just a tool we'll share with you afterwards that helps our reflective thinking practice at Hilltop. We'll make sure you get a copy of it.
And we'll make sure that the next series involves this in a little more depth too.
But we're excited to get to the juicy part here. We really want to read some stories to you. So we have a few examples from Hilltop. And Emily, how do you feel about us just taking turns sharing? Okay.
Yeah. I'm gonna have a hard time reading it on my screen. It's really small. And I
Okay.
have a hard copy of a few of them, but I don't have this one. So
Okay.
I'll read this one.
Sure. While I'm reading, you're also welcome to go back to the presenter view if you would prefer to do that.
How do I do it?
Do you see slideshow on the top?
Yeah.
Just go to from current slide, and then you'll have to mess with your orange box again. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So while Emily's working on that, I'm going to go ahead and read you the first story. So this one is from our infant program. This is a story about Jack. And I'm going to make it big so I can see it too. And it's titled by this educator, Compassion, Charisma, and Charm. Compassion, charisma, and charm are words I choose to describe Jack. I watch Jack's interaction with peers and teachers and admire his compassion towards others. He can effortlessly connect with people around him and can create a safe place for his peers to feel comfortable with direct eye contact and a charming smile. He is genuinely interested in others and wants to learn about them, greeting everyone that comes into the room with the same warm welcome. He has impressed all of us with his ability to be motivated and stay determined in reaching his daily goal of crawling and standing. He is warm and he is cheerful, reminding us all that he is present with a boisterous laugh and a dynamic growl to match. Jack reminds us of what it means to be part of a community and to be a friend, but most importantly, how to be your own biggest cheerleader. Jack has taught me the power of social connection and how important it is to nurture our close relationships, a basic human need. Connection starts with us engaging with others, releasing oxytocin to help regulate our mood with positive emotions. We appreciate who you are, Jack. Thank you for teaching us all. Emily, would you like to read the next one?
Yes, I will. Let me fix my little box here. And this one is titled Violetta Summits the Stump. We've changed the kids' names, so I might stumble over Violetta. Violetta. The stumps on the playground are a challenge. They're tall, almost as tall as you. And the one everyone stands on top of has only one step before you're at the top. Some of the older friends can climb by themselves. Other friends need help from a teacher, but they're confident. You hadn't climbed the stump before. You started out by looking at it very carefully, touching the top with your hands, but not trying to climb. Then you put your feet on the step and tried to push up. When that didn't work, you tried several times to rearrange your body, seeing if there was any way you could get up to the top. You kept on trying, and once you got frustrated, I offered you a hand. You took my hand and used all your strength to pull your body up so you were standing on the step. Then once you were there, you took a risk and stepped onto the very top. You did it. You were on the top of the stump, almost as tall as a teacher. You could see so many things. It was a whole new way of looking at the playground. You showed a lot of courage with your climb, Violetta. Even though it took you time to figure out how to climb, you never gave up. You tried a bunch of different ways to get up there, experimenting with the best position to push yourself up. You persisted until you were able to use your strength, motor skills, and a hand from a teacher to reach the top. And when you got a boost, you kept going without any fear, taking a risk to stand on the stump and feel accomplished with what you'd done. Violetta, I hope you keep on persisting in the future. Knowing how to keep trying will be really helpful for you as you encounter new skills to learn and problems to solve. And I hope you keep experimenting with new ways to solve problems. These two traits together will really help you discover yourself as you grow up.
Thanks, Emily. So I'll read another one, and this is an example of a preschool age child. And this one has an example of the parent's response, which we know can be challenging to get a response sometimes from families. They are very busy. They don't always get a chance to read our documentation. One strategy that I know this particular educator uses is she prints these stories and physically hands them to parents and caretakers so that they can do a quick handwritten response. And she has noticed that gets a lot more response than an email, for example. So this one is about Maya. Maya in the pouring station. As adults with busy lives, there are often simple life skills that we take for granted. Basic everyday tasks that have become part of our daily routine do not always come easy for young children. But we have discovered it is these monotonous actions are often what intrigue our spruce room kids. To honor this life skill curiosity, we like to enrich the learning environment with opportunities, such as pouring practice. And it's here where I found Maya and Roxy working on perfecting their skills. The setup included many different shaped containers, varying in weight, size, materials, purple, sparkly, lavender scented water, and lots of towels for obvious reasons. In that moment, I watched as Maya demonstrated careful intentionality as she practiced pouring, fully immersed in her task. Her steady hands and focus reflected her commitment to mastering the process, while attempting to ensure that the water flowed precisely. I observed as Maya would overflow a jar and then adjust when trying again. Maya's collaboration with Roxy, who expressed a strong desire to take the lead, highlights her maturity and a dynamic of respectful reciprocity. Together, they navigated a balance where one contributed careful actions, while the other observed, studied, and supported with enthusiasm. Their interactions revealed a mutual respect for each other's strengths, one's patience and precision, complementing the other's leadership energy, creating a multi-layered experience. Maya, I was excited to see how you and Roxy took turns and helped each other while practicing pouring. I noticed that even when you made a mistake and overflowed the jars, that you did not get frustrated. You just figured out how to solve your problem, and you tried again. That shows me that every mistake helps you learn something new. And it's amazing that you know that's how you get better. You never give up. I also thought it was great how you let Roxy be the leader for some of the pouring. I've noticed that because you and Roxy both have strong ideas, that sometimes you both get mad about who's in charge when deciding ideas for your games. You are a kind and flexible friend. And this last section is written directly to Maya's parents. Jean and Lydia, what surprises you about this story? Do you notice Maya demonstrating growth in these areas, perseverance, and social interactions from the story? Have you noticed a leap in her development at home? And the parent responds, I'm impressed she can pour liquids, and delighted by her respectful and collaborative interactions with Roxy. We do see Maya maturing, although we do not see her social interactions as much in real life as we would like. She's actually struggling with some social anxiety in her new swim class. We've noticed, though, that she's becoming more patient and independent overall. We are so proud of her growth. And I wonder, Emily, if we want to skip to the last group story so we have enough time.
Yeah, I think we can. This one is just a good example of highlighting a challenging moment, but it is much longer. So yes, I can read this one. And I think this one is a good example of the teacher learning from the children, actually. And I do feel like there's a lot missing, and I wish the pictures were a little better quality because you'd be able to make a little bit more sense of it. But I think it's going to be great anyways. I'm going to have to use the hard copy here. This is about one-year-old kids. As I entered the cloud space this morning, I was greeted by 8 smiling faces. Just what I needed coming to school today. Unfortunately, the time I had to offer was limited and diaper duties were needed. As Faye got to work on diapers, one of the other teachers, I stayed behind in cloud and attempted to engage some activities for the children with reading, singing, climbing, even wrestling, but nothing was working. I felt confused. I decided to take a seat and watch what the children were naturally gravitating towards, which eventually led them to the paint area. At first, I considered shutting it down. I knew it was almost time to go outside and that it was almost time for me to go as well. Yet in this moment, I felt compelled to continue to be still and just watch for what came next. Wendell and Avery began to pull out paints from a previous project and immediately called to the attention the other children in the space. Here's what I saw. Connection to a past activity and memory skills, parallel play, dramatic play and reenactment, feelings management and coaching, and expression of feelings and being willing to work through them once they were ready. And if you can see in the pictures, the kids aren't actually pouring the paint or even asking to pour the paint. They're just reenacting an experience that they've had with their teachers around painting and the tools that they used for painting. I was reminded today of the amazing capability and complex brain development these children are experiencing each day. Thank you, Cloud Kids, for recreating this activity for me to see. Is this me?
Yeah, are you able to widen your the orange box a little bit more, Emily?
Yeah, I'm working on it.
Thank you.
How's that?
That looks great. Thanks.
A lot of centers have their own curriculum that they use. We at Hilltop are using creative curriculum alongside emergent curriculum. And one thing you didn't see in these stories, but that we're hoping to do is we're continuing to find ways to merge the two. They do work really well together. And so what we've been asking our staff is to pull from the creative curriculum objectives and just really clearly name them at the end of the learning story. Yeah, so I'm sure if you can read these on your screen, there's a lot of them that showed up in each of the different stories. And over time, I think someone had brought this up, is how do I use this? How do I collect this data and do like share developmental information about one particular child? And I think you can use this to sort of start checking off like what you've seen them be capable of. And then, you can come back and be like, oh yeah, we haven't shared any stories or information about their language yet. Let's focus on that piece for a little while. But yeah, we do our best to try to tie these objectives and the learning and development goals for children into our learning stories as much as possible.
Mhm.
And here we are at the very end of our time together. We're just wondering, that was a lot of information we shared, a lot of thinking we've done. What's coming up for you all in terms of thinking? Is there anything that's still seeming very challenging for you or something you're still wondering about that we can answer before we end the call in about 11 minutes?
Well, I appreciated how all the learning stories were different from the child's perspective, from the teacher's perspective, from the teacher's expertise, from the teacher feeling like, oh, I don't know about what's happening right now. And just that ability to be vulnerable and go through the process. So that was really just kind of eye-opening and you don't have to be so nervous about it. And I think that will be really helpful for other teachers learning this process.
For sure.
We also have at least one teacher on staff who handwrites his learning stories pretty often because something happens in the room and he just wants to capture it. And he just goes for it. And he's been very prolific in that way because he takes kind of the perfectionism out of it. And his stories are all very meaningful and creative. Kat is sharing, this was a good introduction to the workshop. It helped me understand what I can do. I thought it was more limited than that. And I'm really looking forward to writing learning stories. That's great to hear, Kat. Thank you for being here.
Anyone else?
I can ask like a general question, but I think it's depends on the context of it. I think I liked seeing the learning story that had the parent feedback piece. I think including that piece is really important. And I wonder how to make this a part of um, when the parents are able to physically get that copy. Like sometimes when things are getting printed out, they get lost in the shuffle. That happened with learning stories before, and I think like sending them through email, it's just not effective in that way. So I was curious, maybe if anyone else had experience writing learning stories with a parent response and how that went for them. Because I've never done it, but I feel like it's kind of an essential piece to consider now, at least moving forward.
Yeah, great question, Rose. Would anyone like to share if they've had um, any success with getting family feedback on stories or even just documentation in general? What strategies you've used?
Pam's raising their hand.
Mhm.
So we do our stories using an app. It's called Story Park,
Mhm.
and that allows us to send the stories electronically. So that's kind of easy, it's not on a wall and it's not a piece of paper. It's right there, and there's a mechanism within it that families can just respond. So it's sort of built in. So if we post learning stories, usually we get some kind of comments.
Mhm. Cool. Yeah. We've heard from another program that uses Story Park as well. Yeah, with mixed success, it sounds like. Um, yeah, we know parents are busy. For some parents and family members, digital is way more accessible for them than paper might be. Or when they're getting ready for bed at night and they have some downtime, that might be a much easier time for them to read a document online than um, necessarily to read print. Um, yeah. Oh, and I see you're saying here, Pam, that the teachers can print the learning stories from Story Park as well. So it has that dual purpose.
I would say too, one thing that worked well for me was one, like having a strong relationship with the families, but also when I would email it to them, I would put a lot of information about their specific child and what I learned about them through the story so that they were a little more motivated to open it up and just try to make it like in the body of the email, just sell the story as much as I could. And then also just like following up in the coming days. Hey, did you get a chance to read the story that I wrote about Violet yet? Those kinds of things tend to help go a long way.
Mm-hmm. I know at Hilltop, our teachers have also used, and I myself have used the strategy of right before a conference with a family, I'll send it as this is your homework before we meet. Read this story, and I want you to bring some reflections when we meet. So making it a really specific ask with a very specific timeline has been very helpful. Um, And also, Pamela, you mentioned making books for the kids from those stories that you print. Um, those physical portfolios that can travel between home and school. Some teachers really make that a practice in their classroom. Maybe every week or every 2 weeks, they tell parents, take the portfolio home and look at the new stories in there. Um, and then it's a specific invitation and, a little bit of friendly pressure on families to take the time to do it. And Kat, I see your question in the chat. How often should we do learning stories for each child per year? What's considered enough? Great questions. What do you think, Emily?
I think that there's a lot of different answers to that, right?
Mhm.
I think it depends on the expectations of your program.
Mhm.
I think it depends on how much time and space you actually have to work on those kinds of things. It's difficult to do those during classroom time. But if your children sleep at nap time and you have the ability to even just like handwrite it if you don't have a laptop, and then all you need to do when you do get out of the classroom is just type it up, just really thinking about strategies you have. I think as an organization, we've gone round and round quite a few times over the years of is there an expectation and what is that expectation and um, are we tracking them all to make sure that everyone has a similar amount of learning stories, those kinds of things. But I think it tends to be an organizational decision depending on where you work and what they're hoping for. And also how much time you have, like, and how many children you have, right? We have a primary educator system. So,
Mhm.
and 2 primary teachers in each classroom. So that gives a little more flexibility in terms of like, okay, I can focus on writing a story a month, or a story a week.
Yeah, Lynn shared in the chat. At some point, they learned writing about 2 learning stories per week, at least about 2 different children per week. I know in the programs we visited in Aotearoa, New Zealand, some of them do have a tracking system where each child is expected to have a certain number of learning stories by the end of the year as just another accountability piece for them. Yeah.
$7.58, Becky.
I am sure there's at least one more burning question out there. While you are thinking of your question, I'm putting some resources in the chat for all of you. So it's your last chance to sign the sign-in sheet if you want STARS credit or a certificate tonight. We know several of you have signed up for this full series. Thank you for that. We're very excited to see you back here on March 27th. We have a little homework for you for that session. We'd like each of you to bring a photograph or a series of photos or a video of one of your students or a child in your care that you can study at our next session together, and it will inform the work we're doing together. And really try to choose a photo that reflects something about that child that you're curious about, that you know is important about that kid, that really has to do with maybe a thread of their development or their play. And I've also put in the chat the link to our Eventbrite page to see our next additional trainings beyond the Learning Stories series. To access Wendy Lee's Learning Stories resources, there's also a QR code on this slide. And also to see Tom Drummond's website on Learning Stories. Thank you so much, Kat. See you in the chat. Naomi, it can be, there can be more than one child in the photo or the video, but just some piece of data that you can use at the next workshop. And lastly, we would love, love, love if you could join us in person at the next session. We are hoping for this to be both in person and on Zoom. And for this event, everyone wanted to do Zoom, so we flexed with that. But the next 3 sessions will be a bit more hands-on, where you'll be doing some writing and you'll be looking at materials. And we think you'll really get a lot out of it if you can come in person. And of course, we will partner with our wonderful interpreters like Dory and Kelly to attend those events in person if you can make it. So I think we can close there. Feel free to come off mute if you have any final questions or just to say goodbye. Very big thanks to Dory and Kelly for interpreting for us tonight. And thank you, Emily, for your amazing quick typing skills and being a wonderful co-presenter. Thanks, everybody.